We would like to welcome all of you to the CCTV debate, the session on China's next global agenda. My name is Jin-Yong, and I'm the moderator for this very impressive panel. Allow me to introduce to you all of them. Mr. Zhao, the CEO of Hony Capital, one of China's largest private equity investment company. Larry Thomas, former U.S. Treasury Secretary, former president of Harvard, and former director of the National Economic Council for the Obama administration. Mr. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia, former Foreign Minister of Australia, and Mr. Zhang Xiaoqiang, Vice Chairman of the National Development and Reform Commission. He is also the highest-ranking Chinese government official this time in Davos. Mr. Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the UK, and if I may say that Mr. Brown and Mr. Rudd are key architects, among the key architects of the new world order under the G20 framework. Mr. Brown hosted the single most successful and effective G20 Leader Summit in London. And it was an event that saved the world from the brink of financial meltdown. And certainly, last but certainly not the least, Mr. Jin-Yong, who is the new CEO of International Finance Corporation. He's of Chinese nationality. We have increasingly more Chinese nationals leading international organizations. So the topic is China's next global agenda. A lot of us in China might say that China's major world power status arrived a little bit earlier than we thought, and probably 2 to 3 decades earlier than we expected. When I was growing up, we never thought that China might overtake the US as the largest economy in the world in about 5 years of time. And there are discussions about whether China is ready yet to assume its new role in the world, given its size and scale. And there's also a lot of phobia still about China. I recall an article published recently by Professor Zhao, an American political scientist, called "Work with China, Do Not Contain It," suggesting there are still some phobia in the United States. If I may recall that during the third presidential debate last year, President Obama actually called China an adversary. Many of us believe that's a Freudian slip or probably a mistake. So I think China is probably in the process of constructing its new global agenda, its new grand strategy of playing a major world powers role on the world stage. So if I may begin by asking Mr. Rudd, who is also the very first Chinese-speaking leader of a major Western country, to share with us his views on China's global agenda.
Well, Jin-Yong, I think you're right. China's rise has been a bigger surprise to China than it has been to probably the rest of the world. And so therefore, when you ask the question, as is posed in this discussion today, what is China's grand strategy or its global strategy? And you ask this question in private conversations across Beijing with all the think tanks and the government officials, there's usually a general scratching of the head as to what is meant by the question. The answer usually that you get is, we are focusing on the economy. We have a major task at hand, which is the transformation of the Chinese economic growth model. That's going to take all of our energies. What I find interesting, though, is if we look at Xi Jinping's, I think, most important statement since he's become General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, the speech he gave at the National Historical Museum not long ago, where he talked about the need for China's rejuvenation. Some have called it a China renaissance. He did not explain a purpose for it in the sense of, therefore, what we will do in the world, but still a focus primarily on the need to lift China's power and standing in the world. The final point, though, which is the open question, and why so many people around the world still have some doubts, is this. China has benefited from an international rules-based order. That's been around since 1945. It served China's interests. It served all of our interests, by and large. In Asia, there's not much of a rules-based order, but it's half reasonable. The question, therefore, which people pose is, if you're going to be that powerful, if you're going to have national rejuvenation and national renaissance, then the international community would like to get a pretty clear indication soon as to whether you want to make any changes to the rules-based order And if so, what changes and why? Because that does affect not just Asia, but the world.
Thank you. Professor Sarmas, I don't think President Obama would have made that mistake by calling China an adversary if you were still advising him.
President Obama, in the context of that statement and in the context of many things he's recognized, he has said, believes very strongly that the United States and China can be strategic partners in the years ahead. He recognizes what I think is the most important thing for people on both sides of the Pacific to recognize, which is this is anything but a zero-sum game. That while obviously there's economic competition in certain industries, while obviously there are differences in view, overwhelmingly the interactions between the United States and China are a positive sum sphere. That a world that is prospering and growing and increasingly integrating is going to be a better world for the United States and is going to be a better world for China. So I think any attempt to conceptualize the US-China relationship in a way that is analogous to the way the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union was conceptualized in the period after the Second World War is, I think, a profound and dangerous confusion. And I think it risks becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy if it is emphasized on both sides. At the same time, I think it is essential that there be a recognition on both sides that history teaches us that dramatic changes in relative economic capacity often come with strains that have to be managed, and when managed poorly, can have catastrophic consequences, and that there needs to be a recognition on both sides that the world changes as that takes place. I think increasingly there needs to be a priority on multiple tracks. There needs to be a very extensive and thoughtful tactical management of the issues that take place and that are always there at any moment, the particular tensions in particular geographies or in particular economic spheres. But at the same time, I think that there needs to be, and this is a role for government officials, but it's a role for those involved in public policy in a broader sphere, a conceptualization of where we're going in the long term that can guide the tactics. And the absence of such a broader vision and dialogue towards such a broader vision is, I think, an important part of the reason why, in so many cases, going back to Athens and Sparta, rising economic powers have not been managed well. And that's something that very much needs to preoccupy all of us going forward.
Mr. Brown, one might say that there's probably more fear or phobia among the elites in the United States, opinion leaders, politicians alike, than in Europe. It seems it's probably an easier job for the for European countries to manage the rise of China, is it?
Yes, I think, but I think we've got to bear in mind that the rise of China is taking place in a totally different context from the rise of any other power in any other century. This is, as Larry is suggesting, an interdependent world. John Kennedy made a speech in the 1960s when he was president, and he said America had a declaration of independence, and of course it was independence from Britain actually, but it should have a declaration of interdependence, and that was him talking in the 1960s. And this interdependent world is quite different from any other world. So in comparison with Russia and America in the 1960s, there is social contact. There is thousands of students traveling to America and back from China. There is massive trade relationships. That was not happening in the Cold War period between Russia and America. So it is a completely different world, interdependent. And therefore, what we've got to search for is the convergence of interests. We've got to find where China, America, Europe, India, of course, other countries have a convergence of interests with each other and then build on that. And we have got to sponsor international cooperation. I would argue that the world economy is growing far slower than it should because we have failed to build on the idea of interdependence and global cooperation. And China could consume more, America could invest more in infrastructure, Europe could make a contribution through investment. India is opening up, Japan has just announced it wants to grow. If we had a more coordinated response to the economic crisis, we could do a lot better and less people would be out of work. And China should be very much part of that. And so I would say to the China government, the new government, don't be discouraged by rhetoric that is sometimes extreme, rhetoric that suggests it's a Cold War or this containment is the policy. Actually believe that in an interdependent world, cooperation has got to be the order of the day, whether it's on the environment or whether it's on financial stability or whether it's, of course, on the economy and macroeconomic policy generally, and work for the long term, which is that we have to cooperate more acutely on all the big issues of our time. And China should now want to play its rightful role in what is not a unipolar world for the future, but a multipolar world that is historically quite different because it is interdependent.
Minister Zhang, the words and ideas of grand strategy, global agenda are Western English concepts. Chinese people tend to see the world through a different lens, and largely China's global policies are determined by its domestic priorities. And I know that you have repeatedly communicated that message to the rest of the world. However, there are still accusations and indications that China is behaving increasingly more assertively or aggressively when it comes to certain issues. How would you define China's global vision in the, what Mr. Brown said, in the interdependent capacity?
Yes. In fact, I think that the new leader of the Chinese government and the Communist Party has emphasized very clearly the strategic agenda for China in the future is realize the modernization of China. And of course, for the largest developing country itself, modernization must be a great contribution for the human beings' progress and development. And the Chinese government also emphasized very clearly China's modernization will persist on the peaceful development, the opening development, the cooperative development, and the win-win development. So, in fact, China already take a lot of efforts in many global challenges, such like dealing with the international financial crisis, the climate changes, food security, and we will continue to play the important role as a responsible developing country. And we emphasize to build up a more fair global development partnership. Particularly, of course, we first want to promote the common development within the developing country. But this also will contribute a lot for the whole world's peace, progress, and prosperity.
Mr. Zhao, Professor Summers used the verb manage. He said the world, the U.S. needs to properly manage the growing scale of the Chinese economy. How do you understand manage?
Well, I guess there's proactive meaning to it. That is, you have a strategy and you go execute, and there could be passive, you're managed. That actually is a good segue to my thought on the China agenda. My feeling is in the past, China's global agenda has been very much domestically oriented. The government lead the people to lift many people out of poverty, so and have gradually engineered very systematically reform that is necessary to move forward. So result of that is, 30 years later, China, maybe even by accident, became a second largest economy. But again, China is being noticed because of the size and the speed of increase. But again, I just don't think China is a strong, it's a world power. It doesn't have the strength, it has the size. Of course, being put in that position, the next step is to become a truly responsive country, a world power, because there's no avoidance. The fact is, somewhere down the road, economy will be the number one. And then, so there's a lot of learning for China to do. So I think for the next 10 years, maybe 30 years, China really do need to develop a global agenda to learn very quickly how to play a good citizenship role in the new order which is being formed. But to that end, I actually am fairly confident because you look at the track record, how this government lead the reform of domestic agenda in the last 30 years. There's a lot of self-learning, self-correcting. And now that the topic is how to become a world power, and I believe that with the reform-minded leadership group, and also with a very good experience of the so-called touching the water, touching the bed across the water, 摸着石头过河. So I think quickly we will develop a true global agenda, but that is more a country with both size and the strengths, and more so, the strengths will come from ideas, innovation, and value that everybody shares.
Mr. Tsai, the view from an international organization that is still headquartered in Washington, D.C.
I think any country, when they, you try to figure out what is the agenda, it's all based on the national interest. So what is the China's interest? I think this has been described very clearly in many documents and also in the recent speech by President Xi. And China wants to become a modern, creative, sustainable, and high-income society by 2020, 2030, depends on the, what's your definition, but there's a common elements of that. When you look at China's development, from the World Bank perspective, we do a lot of cross-country comparisons. Since 1980, when China starts to get integrated into the world, China has a major contribution. And the MDG, Millennium Development Goal, China, in that, when you look at the number there, over the last 30 years, China has lifted 600 million people out of poverty. It's amazing. And no one has seen that in the world history. Going forward, by the way, China achieved that because of the supporting international environment, not to mention a lot of very good policies. The market opened up for the Chinese manufactured goods, and a lot of learning China has really, Chinese are very good learners, working with international organizations, learning with a lot of investors. Going forward, the agenda to achieve what I said earlier, goal to become a high-income society, also creative and modern, China still need to really be part of the global community, even more so. So how to do that? I think there are different views about Chinese investment internationally, and there are a lot of worries. But when you look at the contribution China has made, even over the last 5 years, before I started this job, I was working in an investment bank. I did a lot of cross-border transaction, advisory, both for the Chinese company, also advise international companies. There's no question China's experience, Chinese capital, and capability is very much part of a solution to the world growth, to the world imbalances over the last few years. Actually, there are a lot more expectation. Since I started working in IFC, I have traveled to many places. You talk to the leaders, they're all asking me, what can we learn from China? I think there are a lot of things China can offer. China has to be confident to become part of the world in a way that's cooperative.
Thank you. I would like to ask Professor Summers a further question, which is, so far, as Mr. Tsai has said, the Chinese contribution to the world has largely been economic. How do you see the future in which China contributes more ideas, more leadership roles, governance roles in the new global governance structure?
I think it's important in thinking about China and China's economic rise to recognize one aspect that is really different from things we've seen historically. There will be a day when China becomes the largest economy in the world. That will be a day when China's income per capita is 25% of America's income per capita. That's an arithmetic tautology, since the population of China is 4 times as large as that of the United States. A 4 times gap in per capita income is a great deal. It's taken the United States roughly 75 years to grow its economy per capita by a factor of 4. So when China becomes the largest economy in the world, it will be because it has reached the per capita standard of living that was reached in the United States sometime, you can argue, 60 years ago, 80 years ago, but sometime very substantially back in the past. So it is the largest economy, but it will still, across the totality of it, be well short of the global cutting edge in terms of standard of living. And I think that needs some of the more paranoid and alarmed things that are said in the West, I think, do not reflect an understanding of the extent to which growth and modernization still will be a major priority for China. But I think it is also important to recognize that China is, in important respects, have a growth model that is not recapitulation of what took place in the West, but involves important and distinctive elements and involve aspects of leapfrog. Perhaps the clearest example is in telecommunications, where China will never build out the kind of landline infrastructure that was built out in the United States and in Western Europe, but instead will rely on cellular technologies that will provide much more information and interconnection much more quickly than was ever achieved. I think China will have a major role as a role model for other developing societies. China has achieved convergence in a way that has not been achieved historically, far more rapidly, and that has to be something that is enormously influential. And even as it achieves convergence, one of the things that is striking as I speak with my colleagues in science and engineering is that in a number of specific areas, China is really very close in innovation to the cutting edge of the global economy. So I don't think there's a single answer to your question. I think it's very important to distinguish between being the world's largest economy and being the world's cutting edge economy. Those are very different things that are often confused. I think it's very important to recognize that even when it is the world's largest economy, the modernization, urbanization, domestic integration imperatives will be very large for China. And I think all of those, particularly those who are converging, will have much to learn from the aspects of the Chinese growth strategy that are distinctive and not recapitulations of what took place a long time ago in the West, or even what took place in certain Asian economies a generation ago.
John, Professor Summers mentioned how China might become a role model for some of the other developing economies, emerging economies. But what's at the core of China's growth strategy? as Mr. Zhang has repeatedly said on numerous occasions, which is also a buzzword for 2013 Chinese economy, is reforms, continuing reforms. And on the reform side, China is probably a little bit more efficient than other countries that are suffering from political paralysis. And so what would you say are the up and downsides of the Chinese efficient reform model?
Well, China was forced into rethink about the system, political system, social system, culture, heritage 30 years ago, and the result is opening up. When China opens up to the world, it develops. But again, as we all agree, in addition to the wealth and the number position that is created in the second largest economy, the most valuable asset is really as a system. You know, government and people alike, they've gone through self-correcting reform. That experience is very valuable. Not only to the future agenda execution of China, also it's valuable, I believe it's also valuable for the rest of the world, because I noticed that on this panel, I'm the only businessman and in private sector and in front of policymakers. We always wish for two things. One is world peace. It sounds like a cliche, but that's what it is. And the second one is opportunity to develop. In order to secure that globally, really there are two topics for each and every country, China included. One, how do the countries get along and quickly and efficiently form the new order? To that extent, I think China needs to learn, because China has a long history, but as long as its history is being very domestically focused. And being a one of the largest economies, a recent, very short history. And China is still reacting to this role. I recall many years ago in this forum, when the rest of the world is calling on China to be a responsible big country, many Chinese, include leadership, misunderstood it. They thought, well, the world is in a crisis mode, and the rest of the world wants China to put up the money to save the world. And I was saying, no, really, as a participant, you need to have rules and orders and behavior that doesn't scare other people and get people supported. So these things China will have to learn very quickly. But as I said earlier, as far as learning, China really has a lot of experiences. And then with its domestic opportunities, it will continue to focus on getting people to be in better places. And there's still a lot of things to do. There's still more than 400 million people that will be moved from rural area to city setting. So I think, even with that in mind, China will continue to have a domestic focus, but again, quickly learn how to become a world country.
Mr. Brown and then Mr. Rott.
Yeah, I visited China quite a lot recently, and at the World Economic Forum in China, which was a great event too. And the buzzword is reform. The new leadership is talking about reform. And the recognition is that the changes that were made in the last 30 or 40 years took China to become a middle-income country. But other reforms and different reforms are needed to become a high-income country. The situation that Larry described, that even when you're the biggest economy in the world, your income per head is still only 25% of that of America. So the agenda is very clear. The agenda is to, first of all, improve the education system, which is absolutely critical to get both graduates and highly qualified school leavers, to improve the urban system in China, and urbanization and free of pollution, of course, is a huge issue for the growing middle class in China. Labor market reform, and I think China must be clear with these new reports that it must eliminate child labor, which I know the government does not want to see. And equally, of course, financial sector reform, which the World Bank report on China emphasizes a very important part of the next stage. But I think what is interesting is that in each of these changes that China is about to make, as it embarks on this new reform agenda under a new leadership, international cooperation is going to be vital too. Now, other countries are going to look to China, because there's no Latin American country has moved in the last 50 years from being middle income to high income. There are many Asian countries, not Korea, not Singapore, of course, not Hong Kong, who have not moved to being high-income countries, who are looking at what China is doing. But to do these things, financial sector reform, environmental reform, education reform, cooperation with the international community, the recognition of this interdependence is going to be very important. And that's why events like this, when China and Chinese leaders are exchanging ideas at the World Economic Forum with other countries, are incredibly important. So yes, people are looking to China to see how quickly it can move from being a middle-income country to a high-income country, but the situation in which that happens demands, as I repeat, far greater international cooperation than ever before.
Mr. Rod.
I think when we try to answer this question of China's future global agenda, let's just bear some basic disciplines in mind here. We've spent the last half century or more understanding Washington and what Washington regards as being its core priorities for itself and for the world. Now the challenge is to do the same with Beijing and to actually understand how Beijing sees the world from their perspective looking out. This is a complex exercise. But if you look at those priorities, number one, China says it wishes to maintain the centrality of the Communist Party. Number two, it says the territorial integrity of the state and political unity at home. Now, these are common to all countries, but it makes China very edgy about questions on territorial integrity. Number three, which has been the burden of our conversation so far, is economic growth, economic modernisation executed through the new economic growth model, which has been a subject of much discussion and debate. And within that, reliability of supply for critical resources, raw materials, energy. Number four, in order to achieve three, if you're looking at it again from Beijing's perspective, what do you need? John mentioned this before. You need a sustained period of strategic peace and stability, and not just the next few years, not just the next decade, but beyond as well. But there's one other thing we in the collective West need in particular to bear in mind. When we hear China say, as Xi Jinping said recently, that the program is about national rejuvenation, a stronger China and a more powerful China, that's also the product very much of Chinese history. When China looks at its own history, and for 100 years was the subject of multiple foreign occupations, from the Opium Wars to the Japanese occupation, there is etched in the cerebral cortex of every Chinese leader, never, ever, ever again. And that is so deep and profound, we don't quite understand that in the West, because most of us, not Australia, were part of the various occupying forces from 1840 to 1945. It's important to understand that reality, but here is one additional point. China also is seeking to be recognised as its proper place as a great power in the councils of the world. But this is where it gets tricky. When China looks at its own historical narrative, the Chinese literature constantly points to the Han and the Tang as being China's great power periods in the past. There's a qualitative difference, however, to the world of the Han and the Tang, one, the first approximating with the Roman Empire, the second around 700 to 900 AD. The concept of an international society and community of states back then did not exist. Therefore, there is no inbuilt Chinese software in the philosophical and political system of how you participate in a global rules-based system. So therefore, when you put the question to our Chinese friends, okay, here are the rules of the system, the world, how do you want to change it? Are you happy with what's there? This is a deep project underway within China's own thinking. And my final point is this. I'm, on balance, a huge optimist and a huge advocate of what China has done, given the extraordinary history post-49 and what they've done since 79. It's remarkable. Deng Xiaoqiang is a towering figure of the 20th century. But in Asia today, which is where we in Australia have our home, there are two competing forces at work simultaneously. The forces of what I would describe as economic globalisation, which Gordon's been talking about, everyone's been talking about, which is universally positive. More commerce, more interconnections, the whole box and dice. It's a terrific story. And that's 21st century globalisation working in one direction against a countervailing force across Asia of 19th century, quite primitive nationalisms, still alive and still well. If you want the manifestations of that, look at the East China Sea, the South China Sea. So I think, therefore, to prevent any of that from actually dominating the agenda, there is a real opportunity with Xi Jinping's appointment, President Obama's re-election, to carve out what I would describe as a genuinely new strategic roadmap between these two countries. These windows of opportunity don't arrive often, but they should select between them one or two items in the global order to work on and bring to completion, whether it's climate change, whether it's trade, whether it's nuclear non-proliferation or whatever. In the regional order, rules of the road, so you don't have conflict through miscalculation in terms of the security of East Asia. And bilaterally, to deal with some of the most sensitive questions between China and the US as well. If we do that, we start to get everyone focusing on what I believe is a positive and constructive agenda, managing the differences on the way through, and using cooperation to in fact change the strategic mindset.
Minister Zhang.
I prefer to, express my feelings from the economic development pattern. And because China is the largest developing country, so for the modernization and industrialization, it's really need huge amount of the energy and natural resources. From this aspect, many of the countries worry about China's development model, whether it's sustainable. So the Chinese leaders has emphasized very clearly, in the future, we will move our development base to efficiency and quality. That's, like many people mentioned again and again, change development model and structural adjustment in a strategic ways. This means in the future, China will more and more rely on enlarging domestic demand, rely on science and technological innovation. So only this can make sure the sustainable development and modernization of the country. And we already make a great effort for the energy saving, for the resource saving, for the pollution reduction, for the environment protection, for poverty alleviation. For example, in last year, the per unit GDP energy consumption reduced 3.6%. So if we do in this way, it can, I think, benefit for the whole world's sustainable development. And second things I would like to mention in here is that even though China's market, we emphasized, depends on the enlarging domestic consumption, that doesn't mean it's a closed market. With the development of the market of China, maybe in 10 or 15 years later, it be one of the largest markets in the world. We will continue to opening more for the whole world. In fact, many of the foreign companies invested in China for last single year. The FDI real inflow to China is around 120 billion US dollars. So the many foreign companies got the development opportunity and made money. And in another hand, some people worry about China's overseas investment. I think that in one hand, that is quite understandable, because in the developing stage at the moment, China's enterprises have the capability for the international competition and the overseas business. But one thing I would emphasize is that all those overseas investment, for example, in last year, the overseas investment of Chinese enterprises is nearly $80 billion US, nearly 30% increase compared with the same period of last year. It's decided by the enterprises based on commercial principle. And the target is development and win-win.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor and see if we have any questions or comments and ideas to share. Richard Edelman.
Mr. Zhang, I think one of the obstacles for Chinese companies going overseas.
May I ask you to stand up?
Oh, sure.
It's a TV
Sorry.
show. We need to.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Is the reputation of Chinese brands and companies. We do a study in 26 countries, and we find of 26 countries, China headquartered companies have the lowest reputation. Then Russia, India, Mexico, and compared to a British company, American company, in developing markets, it's okay, but in developed markets, in the UK, in the US, in Germany, Chinese companies have a real trust problem, actually. Treatment of employees, the sense of lack of transparency, non-compliance with environmental standard, all these things are issues that I think Chinese companies are really going to have to confront in the next decade.
Yes, I think you really raised an important question. Frankly speaking, the accelerated overseas investment that just happened in the new century. For example, in year 2002, the overseas investment of the Chinese enterprises is only around $3 billion US. And last year, I mentioned nearly $80 billion US. So in those so fast developments, for many of the Chinese companies, they really like of the experience how to following the commercial principle, the international practice, and increase their transparency and handle the relationship with the local community, the management, the employees, and other respected partners. So I think that the Chinese company can learn from the practice and to increase their capability to have a more and more efficient multi-international competition and business.
John, you have a quick point to add on the Chinese competitiveness of Chinese companies.
Yeah, we actually have facilitated a number of cross-border investments. Initially, it was always foreign companies investing in China, but recently it's more Chinese companies extending its reach abroad. And I want to just make a point about interdependency. I think that's the correct vision for global order. And more than ever, two things are certain. One, politics is nationwide. Country will not disappear, and the political system will remain, and the argument continues. The other certainty is economy is global. The world is connected, and there's no turning back. How to reconcile these two? So we need to have a new vision for that relationship, not strategic competitor, not containment. It's more of interdependency, as Mr. Brown have advocated. On the macro level, it's really about value proposition that are mutually beneficial. One Chinese company invests in a European company, it acquired brand, technology, Western distribution network, but it also brought along a vast Chinese market. So a technology that is playing a role in European market in very short order would play a much larger role in China and globally. So I think these benefit, if you multiply it, is very telling, and that's the new relationship. But in order to facilitate that, my feeling is that we all need to reform our mindset, our infrastructure. I was here last year, and the key word is European debt, a lot of uncertainty and worry. This year is still European issues, but stability. What's the difference? Well, European politicians have taken the time, including the crisis, to have facilitated tough reforms. So I think as long as we have that reform mindset, the world could be a better place.
We still have less than 15 minutes for quick questions and quick answers. Gentleman in the back with a newspaper, please stand up. Thank you.
My name is Gerard Hartzing. I'm very interested in foreign exchange. I'm working in the foreign exchange business. So far, the dollar is the reserve currency, and maybe the euro is second best. Does the panel have any view on the speed of internationalization of the renminbi from a US perspective, from a Chinese perspective, and maybe also from a UK perspective? There are very strong statements also from Beijing perspective, and the process of internationalization started already.
We'll start with the number one economist on the panel, Professor Summers.
I don't think there's any question that the role of the renminbi in the international financial system will increase over time, assuming that China's economic growth and convergence continues in a relatively orderly way. I think, however, that there are a variety of reasons to suppose that the centrality of the dollar in the international financial system is unlikely to change in a major way, except possibly over very long periods of time. Just as there's a basic inertia in languages of communication, there's a basic inertia in mediums of exchange that mean that reserve currencies, currencies of denomination of trade, tend to persist for a very long time. Traditionally, currencies that become reserve currencies are currencies in which there are very deep, open, and liquid capital markets. For appropriate reasons, China has been very careful in the process of the liberalization of its capital market, and while that process will continue, it's a process that will continue with considerable deliberativeness in my judgment. So while I expect that the renminbi will play a larger role, it's currently the policy of China to be very resistant to rapid capital flow in and out, which has good reason for it, but it has the consequence that renminbi assets are not highly liquid stores of value for anyone who wants to hold them over any particular horizon. So I would judge that the question of reserve currency is one where change is likely to be rather slower than I think a certain amount of the rhetoric would suggest.
Mr. Brown, would you concur?
I think the issue of the internationalization of the currency answers the question that Kevin posed earlier. China, faced with this reality of globalization and a history that has been about national sovereignty, has actually, in my view, made the choice. It wants to be part of the global economy. It's part of a global supply chain. The internationalization of the currency will continue in stages, gradually, not dramatically, but in stages. But I would have thought where cooperation and China's role in the international community could be better cemented in the future is cooperation on financial stability issues, cooperation on environmental issues, on trade issues. I think we could make more progress. In fact, I would say to America, there's less likely to be progress on either the internationalization of the renminbi or on all the currency issues that become part of big disputes. And we should set that aside for some time and concentrate on those areas where this convergence of interest could actually yield to practical results, where international cooperation is then proven to be effective, and people are then of the belief that more international cooperation will yield results. So I think China has made its choice, and I think we've got to help China develop its relationships with the rest of the world. Now, China has problems to solve as it moves from middle income to higher income, because the problems will be, as the World Bank report on China showed, that when there are environmental issues, you will have an increasingly vociferous middle class who are wanting their voice heard on pollution issues, on issues of corruption, on issues of civil liberties, where innovation happens, a freer environment will be called for. All these issues will come up in this transition from middle income to high income economy. I've no doubt that China can do it and be a model to the rest of the world, but you will not be able to evade these questions over the next few years. They will be absolutely central to the debate about the future, and we benefit from an international discussion of these issues, and I believe we can help each other in moving forward in solving some of these problems.
Yeah, internationalization of currency, RMB, could mean two things. One is, like Larry just said, become a world currency like US dollar. The other one could simply mean freer exchange or free flow of RMB. The first, the former, I agree, it will take a long time, and it's not just a currency issue. It's a society, political system, legal system. But the freer exchange of RMB will come much sooner than most of us expected. As a matter of fact, China has set up a special zone, special zone. There's a little place, 15 square kilometer, called Qianhai. It's a small man-made parcel of land inside Shenzhen. Xi Jinping, first stop after he took over the power, is that piece of land. That's a zone that is designed to do an experiment that is meant to open up currency exchange and RMB inflow and outflow. So I think it will happen very, very fast.
Well, we have 7 minutes left. What I would like to do is to ensure more quick questions and quick answers. So what we'll do is to take 3 or 4 questions in a row, and then each of our panelists will choose to answer them while giving their final comment. The gentleman in the second row, please stand up. Thank you.
Federico Fubini, Corriere della Sera from Italy. The Chinese government has emphasized domestic consumption for a long time already, but if you look at the share of consumption in the Chinese economy, relative share has declined, if anything. So I was wondering whether you understand where the Western doubts come from. If you grow consumption, you put money in people's hands, and they will want to matter politically as well. So I was wondering whether you understand these doubts in the West, even looking at the numbers in the Chinese economy.
Thank you. The lady in the front row. Please stand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chenggang. My question is for Mr. Cai and Mr. Zhao. Mr. Cai used to work with investment banking, which we called it shadow banking. And also, Mr. Zhao is working currently with shadow banking in China. And shadow banking is a very interesting kind of a topic. But in the definition, it's in China and in the rest of the world a little bit different. But just in the non-banking kind of financial sector, it shared similarities. And it's amazing that the China shadow banking has accounted for 50% of the total financial funding in China. So my question is, in the next agenda of China's financial liberalization and reform, where do you see the role of the shadow banking to avoid, on the one hand, of the financial depression, and on the other hand, to fend off the mistake that has been made by the advanced economy to ensure that the shadow banking serves the real economy? Thank you. The gentleman in the third row. And for those of you who speak, please do leave us with your business cards. Go ahead.
So my question is to Mr. Zhang, which is that as the world becomes more and more interdependent, and China wants to integrate more with the world economy, can we expect China to be less protectionist?
And final question from gentleman in the first row. Thank you.
Hi, James Lee. We briefly discussed the recent humiliation, historically speaking, versus the promise of a glorious future. We talk a little bit about how do you harness nationalism responsibly so to ascertain that it does not derail the impressive process and progress so far?
So it's time for the final comment together with answers to the questions. We'll begin with Mr. Cai. We have 5 minutes left, less than 5 minutes.
I don't know the definition of a shadow bank. Fundamentally, the capital markets, actually the capital markets is the biggest reform agenda in the next few years. When you look at the Chinese economy, I think there are a lot of capital, but allocation has been a problem. And how we're going to channel the capital to the most efficient investment and to really deliver the productivity growth, that has been a challenge. I think earlier talk about the RMB internationalization. That's also a precondition for RMB to be a global currency. Without a really functional capital market, that's going to be very hard.
I think we will have financial crises on a regular basis over the next 30 or 40 years, and I think we've got to prepare for the fact that there are issues in the financial systems, particularly in emerging markets, where action needs to be taken. And I think we have failed to learn the lessons of the crisis in 2008. We need a global financial set of rules and procedures. We need that to happen, otherwise we face the danger of things going wrong in the future. Now, China has got very large reserves. It can deal with problems in its banking system, but there will be financial issues that have to be resolved. The second issue that I think is worth mentioning is inequality is becoming a major issue in most countries of the world. And China has had this tremendous success in taking 600 million people out of poverty, but it has also been at a time when inequalities have widened greatly. And I think we've got to be aware, and this is a global phenomenon, that if countries fail to address the problems of inequality, particularly a younger generation, more aware than ever before of where they are denied opportunities and where opportunities are available in other countries but not available to them, they will not accept a continuing rise in inequality around the world. So economic growth, sustainable economic growth with environmental consideration taken into account, which is the Chinese economic plan, but also dealing with some of these other issues of financial instability and inequality. I think that is an agenda that is true of China, but it's also true of many other countries who are trying to become high-income countries as well.
Minister Zhang.
Yes, I want to add another point is that China, for change its development model, one of the very important things is that previously we pay greater attention to export, and which we think can help the country accelerate its industrialization. But now we have much more clear understanding that we must make a balanced import and export. If you look at the last 4 or 5 years record, we had appreciated the RMB to the US dollar more than 25%, and the import tariff had been reduced, and the import facility had been improved. So the surplus of our commodity trade had been reduced from 2008 around 8% of the GDP to last year's 2.8% of the GDP. That means that the more open market for the whole world.
Taking that question that was raised before about how do you positively harness the self-evident existence of continuing forces of nationalism, my point's this. Economic globalization does not, as a matter of inevitable mathematical logic, result in the extinguishment of political nationalism. There is a school of thought which thinks that happens. In our part of the world, where you've got the biggest arms race unfolding in recent global history, that's the Asian hemisphere, there are important other factors which we need to respect. Therefore, it requires conscious political effort and conscious creative foreign policy to in fact construct alternative narratives for the future. Hence why I call for a new strategic roadmap in US-China relations. Secondly, an example, which is very current. Last 24 hours, I think this reflects the priority of both governments in both Tokyo and Beijing. Prime Minister Abe has sent a letter to Xi Jinping through a visiting Japanese parliamentary representative. The letter has been received in Beijing. This is all about the beginnings of intelligent, I hope, de-escalation of this immediate and most recent crisis. But there is always the possibility of crisis or even conflict by misadventure. And my final point is this. To put things into a strategically positive frame, I go back to how the US and China and the rest can cooperate on the global rules-based order where everyone becomes a positive stakeholder for the future. How about this for a wild idea? Get the United States and China in a growth-deprived global economy themselves to drive the conclusion of a comprehensive trade round. China needs more growth, it needs more open markets, the US economy is sluggish. If the so-called G2, which is almost a term which is impolite to mention publicly, could actually drive that to a conclusion, frankly, the rest of the world would sit up and notice. And Xiaoqiang, all international conferences have got to get used to many more Chinese voices and Chinese language on panels like this if we're going to have more and more people who make decisions in China to come along.
Professor Summers, Kevin also mentioned the strategic overlap between Obama's second term and General Secretary Xi's term.
I think there's very much an awareness in the United States of the centrality of the coevolution of the United States and China for global stability. I think that what Kevin said and stressed about the simultaneous presence of growing economic interdependence and still very present nationalisms in Asia is very salient. And I don't see how one can listen to that and not think about Europe in 1910. And when one thinks about Europe in 1910, recognize the need for enormous attention and creativity on both sides, and recognize that successful prospering in trade may in important respects be necessary for all that we want to achieve, but it is some significant distance from being sufficient. I think also that the reality that China holds some trillions of dollars in liquid financial assets around the world on which it is earning an extremely low rate of return, at the same time as there are important shortages of investment in key sectors in much of the industrial world, means that the reflection on how the international financial system operates, where we're in quite unprecedented territory with huge capital flows from poorer countries to richer countries, this is going to need to be an important area of deliberation in the years ahead.
Well, China is a very complex country to manage. It's largest population, second largest economy, going to be the first. But more interestingly, China represents the largest opportunity set. Just to think about Larry just said, even when you're number one per capita, is still a quarter of that advanced country. So wealth creation, economic development is being a very unifying force that is driving China's agenda. I think it will continue to be the case. But China needed to develop a grandeur agenda that includes the world for the first time. So internally develop its economy, try to get into deeper waters in reform, but at the same time recognize the world is interconnected, interdependent, and to start to really open more up, but work with others. But I might also want to add, reform is not just a Chinese task. I think reform is a global task that each and every country needs to do it separately to preserve their sovereignty, maintain their culture, but at the same time to interconnect with each other.
And on that note, we conclude the session. A really warm round of applause for all the impressive panelists. Thank you all very much.